"Move, we breach in 4, barked Commander Torsk Delvak, voice crackling through his throat amp as the Darvani strike team clustered at the skiff's hatch. Weapons were live. Pressure locks were disengaging with a slow, whining twist, air hissing in irregular gasps as the ramp extended and struck the monolith's Deck 3 hull with a jarring clang. They surged in. Boots hit metal with rhythmic thuds. The corridor was dim and long, lined with crates wrapped in canvas mesh and stained with brown fluid streaks. Overhead strips flickered in dull green pulses, barely illuminating the pathway ahead. Each footfall kicked up fine powder clinging to the deck. Decay, not dust. It clung to gloves, visors, armor joints. Whatever had passed through here last hadn't come back through. Delvak raised 2 fingers, signaling formation split. Leftward 3 units took the cargo spine, rightward 2 swept toward central power conduits. Turan, observing from the skiff's command cradle, reclined with a crooked grin as his interface bathed him in red-green tactical overlays. "This is what Earth protects?" Warlord Jask Tren sneered, staring through his embedded viewport. "A food scow with faulty doors and no response team? They've grown soft. They'd rather file claims than fight." The helm officer nodded, dragging one clawed finger across the tactical scope. "No power fluctuations. No emission spike. Just like the last 5 we stripped." Tren leaned closer. "Mark it for salvage. I want all hull panels intact. We'll repurpose her frame. Once we clear the innards..." Inside, the temperature dropped further. Breath condensed in clouds as the Darvani advanced deeper into the belly of the monolith. Moisture clung to wiring bundles, forming little frozen webs between panels. Condensation had collected on one unit's rifle barrel. He rubbed it dry without breaking stride. "IC 3 clear," rasped Operative Hearn. "Nothing but moldy cargo seals and decaying cables." "Check heat source delta," Delvak replied. "Front manifests as livestock proteins. Crates might leak residual body temps." They reached the row of containment pods, stacked 5 high, 7 across, bolted into retention brackets welded into the monolith's structural spine. Each crate bore standard Earth Trade biohazard glyphs, but the glyphs were smeared, not by time, by hand. Something had dragged across them with deliberate force. Gloved prints maybe, or claws. "I don't like this," muttered Darks, the youngest of the squad, visor glinting as his HUD scanned for life forms. The display gave false positives, then none, then surged, with fragmented feedback. "Scan jammed," he said, thumping the side of his scope. "Could be the insulation," replied Hearn. "These freighters run cheap on thermal ducting." Delvak pointed at the second crate from the left. "Cut it." Dark stepped forward, unlatched his vibroslicer and plunged it into the seam. The blade whined as it chewed through reinforced edges. Cold mist expelled from the breach. A faint click echoed up the crate's inner locks. Then something moved. A figure emerged, not stumbled, not blinked, not gasped. He stepped, controlled, upright. One hand raised to the ceiling bulkhead as if bracing against it, then twisted forward in a fluid spin. The sound of compressed air was followed by a single flash. A dart fired into Dark's throat, piercing armor mesh. Dark's collapsed without a cry, body twitching once, then slack. "Contact," Hearn began, raising his weapon, but his trigger finger froze mid-magnet. By the time he'd fully registered the shape before him, a man, helmetless, skin pale from cryo exposure but expression locked in calm. 3 more crates were already opening behind them. The human said nothing. He didn't need to. Warlord Trin leaned forward, eyes narrowing. What was that? The bridge screen had briefly flickered. Just a flash of data loss on Deck 3. Minor, but odd. The technician beside him frowned. Deck-level comms dropped. Likely residual static from stasis field decay. Tren grunted. "Patch it. Tell them to clear the spine. I want confirmation of cargo within 5. But the relay didn't engage. Then a secondary monitor showed a crate, lid fully unlatched, timestamp flashing 2 seconds ago. Another feed loaded. jerky, artifacted. It showed a Darvani soldier crawling backward, visor shattered, before a gloved hand reached down, seized the feed camera, and crushed it into darkness. The technician stared. "Sir, we're not alone on that ship." Tren stood. "No, we're exactly as alone as they wanted us to think." Below decks, Vakar advanced. Each step landed without echo. His team followed, 5 men awakened in silence, their gear fully integrated into the monolith covert systems. Comms relayed via skinlink bands beneath their suits. Their paths diverged automatically, each corridor already mapped, their routes memorized through neural flash training months before launch. Crates weren't storage, they were deployment cells. Corridors weren't transit, they were chokeholds. The ship's layout had never been agricultural. It was surgical. Nolmark crawled laterally through the ventworks, palms magnetized, breath steady. His target, Deck 4's vault hall. He tapped once on the side panel. 5 nodes blinked red, then green. Authorization passed. On the outer hull, panels shifted. Thin fins emerged, locking into place like vertebrae along a predator's spine. No heat spike followed. These weren't weapons in the traditional sense. They were masking devices. Folded heat drains, emissivity shrouds, mimic thrusters. The monolith's disguise, crafted over a decade, had held. Until now, Earth Command remained offline, by design. Marshal Korik Dane watched the data scroll across a private relay buried 3 nodes below the official net. He did not smile. He simply toggled a single phrase into protocol status. Latch fire enabled. Deck 3 fell silent. The term wouldn't be used. But it fit. Delvok tried to regroup. He issued a recall pulse. But no response came. The walls were bleeding fog now, low mist from cracked coolant conduits. The crates had opened. All of them. A boot struck his shoulder from above. Baker landed behind him, pivoting and driving a short blade through the seam in Delvak's armor plate. No celebration, no announcement, just another target, another part of the boarding protocol. More Darvani squads were inbound from the auxiliary ships. They'd be arriving within 2 minutes. Vakar turned toward his squad. "Intercept pattern Alpha 5, let them board." He adjusted his gloves. "They asked for cargo. Let's show them what they really picked up." The car stepped over Delvok's body without pausing. His left hand tapped twice along the bracer welded to his suit, and in response, every operative still embedded within the monolith's false freight began to stir. The command synced via dermal relays buried beneath subdermal layers. No audio, no lights, no need for confirmation. They moved as one. Every breath, every step, every motion calibrated in blackout coordination, drilled so deep into muscle memory, it bypassed thought. Farther down, Deck 3, another crate hissed open. The Darvani patrol approaching it slowed. They had no angle to retreat. Their path was boxed between the freight stacks and the sealed bulkhead. The pod's lid slid upward in a diagonal snap, scattering residual cryofrost across the floor like shattered glass. From the ice fog stepped an Omega-class enforcer. Eyes sharp, suit marked with a single cobalt insignia burned into the upper arm. An empty ring. His boot landed with a sound too clean for this ship. That was the first sign something had gone entirely wrong. One of the Darvani raised his weapon. The operative shot first. 2 rounds, low trajectory. One caught the leg joint. The other severed the shoulder strap of the enemy's harness, sending his gear clattering uselessly onto the floor. The third shot split the helmet casing along the brow. The Darvani leader tried issuing an order, but his comlink chirped with a data spike so strong it overloaded his ears. He screamed, not from pain, but because every channel had been overtaken by a static tone that drilled into his skull at uneven intervals. He clawed at the side of his helmet, collapsed to his knees, and vomited onto the deck plating. The operative didn't look at him again. He was already past the group. At the far end of Deck 4, the 5th crate split open with a hiss and a groan, revealing Operative Drake Vayer. He stepped down onto the reinforced floor tiles, knelt once to check the mag-sat sling rig, then activated his throat seal. He didn't speak. His helmet locked in automatically, the faceplate darkening to filter out the failing overhead lights that sparked above his position. He rotated left, scanned his sector with one glance, then slipped into the side corridor where he'd been assigned during planning weeks before departure. The monolith's inner construction changed now. Panels unlocked in sequence, granting access to crawl spaces and redundant conduits no civilian crew should have known existed. These weren't modifications. They were original. The ship had been designed from the hull inward as a containment and kill zone, with agricultural assets layered only where absolutely necessary to pass scans. Nullmark dropped silently into a vertical shaft behind one of the refrigeration units. His hands slid along the narrow rails coated in oil-thin lubricant to reduce friction. His boots engaged micro-clamps as he descended headfirst, following the pulsing indicators lining his internal visual array. At the shaft's midpoint, he twisted laterally, slipping into a branching chamber that hadn't been mapped on any Darvani archive. At the same time, the false cargo manifest running on the monolith's external broadcast flickered, then disappeared. In its place was a blank registry ping, matching nothing in the Darvani fleet's historical salvage logs. To those watching from the outer skiff's command cradle, it was like the ship no longer belonged to any known classification. Unknown vessel, no ownership, no designation, only location. Back inside, the corridors behind the Darvani forward teams began to seal. First came the clang of one airlock engaging behind them. Then another. The lights overhead stopped cycling and held steady. Off. Emergency strips along the floor illuminated not with yellow, but a muted red, typically reserved for nuclear hazard zones. Doors that had opened seconds before now read biohazard lock. Darvani encryption couldn't override them. Tren's voice boomed into the forward teams via the short-range burst relay. "Report! You're not transmitting telemetry." Hearn's voice came through, ragged, uneven. "They're not cargo, they're soldiers. And we're boxed in." Tren slammed his hand against the cradle's armrest, causing sparks to jump from the console edge. "Fall back to the skiff. Extract. You're compromised." "No path," another voice answered. "The walls are moving." Rainvecker passed through one of the main junctions, fingers sliding across a temperature panel designed to appear damaged. His touch initiated a relay burst that rippled across the ship's core. Hidden servos within the hull adjusted gravity levels in corridors 6 through 8, creating pockets of unstable footing for any Darvani attempting to regroup. More operatives were awake now, sliding through narrow crawl spaces and sealing access routes like phantoms. None of them carried standard communication rigs. No one needed to shout warnings. Every maneuver had been practiced in orbital dropships, in sub-zero labs, in full disconnect training domes, where failure meant immediate removal from program eligibility. Above, a Darvani unit opened fire into an empty passage. The muzzle flare lit a tangle of frost-covered pipes and dripped coolant onto the floor. The sound of footfalls returned behind them, but they belonged to no squad member they recognized. By the time the rear guard turned, the first operative had already passed between two stacks and left 3 bodies behind. Not one shot heard. The Omega squad had deployed in full. Tren's flagship caught the anomaly. From his bridge, the flagship's AI core attempted to re-establish link with the monolith's black box. It received a counterpass instead. A simple stream of characters that made no sense when processed. The tech officer blinked. "Sir? That was sent from within the monolith. It's tagged EarthGov. High encrypt. Burn on read. We weren't meant to see it." Tren straightened. "So, we don't report it. Cut uplink. Keep all ships on standby. Don't approach that freighter until we confirm what's still alive inside." A few decks below, Nullmark reached the central crawlspace junction. He tapped twice against the relay node mounted to the junction's archway. The node blinked once, then again. Then every remaining containment pod within the monolith's hidden decks disengaged. 7 men emerged from dark cradles, bodies soaked in thaw gel, eyes open, weapons already in hand. Makar's voice passed to them via a low-frequency dermal pulse. "You know your sectors. Move." Back near the breach point, one of the Darvani squads attempted to overload a sealed panel with a plasma drill. The bit began to melt, the charge cycling into failure before it could pierce the layer. The floor beneath them groaned, not from structural weakness, but from movement. The monolith was reacting. False walls folded inward, forcing the team to shift left. They found themselves in a narrower hall than before. Panels above began to pulse. Then the airlock behind them reset, and the lights went dead. One soldier raised his visor and spat to the floor. "What is this place?" Another operative's voice answered from behind them, low and calm. "You're standing inside your own mistake." The shot came before they turned. Warlord Jasktren braced against the command cradle's stabilizer bar as another internal camera went black. His helm technician cycled feeds in a desperate loop, but none of the images returned. Only error glyphs layered across the display like frostbitten glass. The monolith's internal layout had changed without notice. Crew tracking was gone. Room designations no longer aligned with boarding schematics. Something inside that hauler had rewritten itself. He slammed his palm down. "Why is the flagship's path lock still engaged?" The nav officer glanced back with eyes wide, sweat glistening along his brow ridges. "Coordinates won't stabilize. It's like the drift vectors are caught in recursion." Tren leaned forward, jaw grinding. "Then cut engine sync and plot a manual spread." Before he could finish, a new set of red pulses blinked across the forward viewport. Outside, the monolith shifted. His hull, the dull, oxidized plating of a decoy freighter, began to crack along symmetrical seams. Entire panels hissed away from the mainframe, dragged back on recessed brackets that groaned under the torque. From beneath, black thruster arrays unfolded like coiled blades. What had once been cargo doors peeled aside to reveal internal compartments, lined with breech ports and magnetic couplings. On screen, a sensor officer whispered, "That's a warframe. It's not a freighter. That's—" "Shut your mouth," Tren snapped, eyes locked on the silhouette unfolding before them. It was built to look harmless. The hull finished its transformation in silence. Along the port spine, rows of kinetic launchers slid forward, their housings etched with Terran serials. No manufacturer's mark, no faction crest, just cold, functional identifiers stripped of branding. The shields designed to mask thermal signatures had been false from the beginning, rigged to decay just fast enough to suggest civilian neglect. Inside the monolith, Rain Vakar passed a bulkhead relay and activated subsurface payload alignment. He didn't break stride. Behind him, Vault-integrated anchor systems engaged, locking secondary weapon banks into alignment with the ship's exposed hardpoints. He tapped the bridge node once and transmitted a too-simple pulse. Stage. Reveal. Back in Earth's command cradle, Marshal Korik Dane stood before a black panel embedded into the wall of the subterranean oversight chamber. The room bore no labels, no insignia. Its only marker was the engraved latch beneath the control terminal. Protocol latch fire. The screen, previously dormant, began logging pulses. Each line denoted escalation. Dane watched without speaking, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the terminal. Outside the Vexus-drift corridor, the Darvani fleet's outer ships began to drift, nudged off course by spatial inconsistencies not present during initial lock. They weren't being pulled. They weren't being hit. Their guidance inputs had begun receiving redundant calibration signals that created feedback loops within the command trees. The result was subtle, a gradual redirection that made automated course correction impossible without a full manual reset. But there wasn't time for that. Tren's flagship began to rotate, slow, deliberate, uncommanded. The helm officer slammed his hand onto the override block. "We've lost trust vector authority. Reset the AI core routing," Tren barked. "I've already tried." The override command triggered a diagnostic that locked out all secondary systems. Tren's second-in-command crossed to the far panel, tried a manual reset, and stepped back as a wave of red-hot sparks burst from the conduit socket. He clutched his arm, blistering already forming along the exposed skin. "That wasn't a hardware malfunction," he growled. "That was an intentional loopback." Another tech officer turned, shaking. "Sir, we're being jammed. By our own ships. Tren stared at him. Explain that. They're not broadcasting enemy interference. They're mirroring our encryption cycles. Every command we issue bounces through a return pulse that contains our own feedback, reversed and recompiled. You're saying we're jamming ourselves? I'm saying they are making us do it. The display at the helm shifted again. Where there should have been Monolith's signature, a series of coordinates appeared, rotating in and out of sequence. Each one flashed for less than a second, enough to trigger update queries across the Darvani fleet systems. As each query was processed, another command path fractured. Until entire fire control chains began blinking. Unverified origin. A junior officer cursed under his breath, pointing at the central display. They've infected the star map. Tren's gaze followed the shifting projection. Instead of solid sector nodes, the navigational interface now displayed twisted chain link loops stretching into nonsensical spirals. Each node tagged with familiar ship IDs but misaligned, as if the fleet had somehow split across separate coordinates in the same moment. How? He whispered. How is that even possible? From behind them, a communications officer shouted, "Command ping received!" Trent spun. From where? The officer paused. From us. Sir, we're receiving a fleet-wide order that didn't come from here. Play it. The audio activated, distorted, fragmented, the cadence unnatural. It sounded like a Darvani voice, but off. Every vowel lengthened, each consonant twisted. It spoke a clear directive. Disengage. Relay command to all bridge units. Authority confirmed. But no one on the flagship had issued it. Tren stared at the screen, where the authorization code matched his own identification mark. They're not broadcasting orders, he murmured. They're replicating our intent. Across the fleet, the effect multiplied. Auxiliary cruisers began misreading thrust vectors. Frigates lagged behind their coordination timing. Some ships rotated mid-drift, exposing ventral armor without command. Internal systems showed no error. But none of it made sense. Inside the monolith, Unit 6 Nullmark activated Vault Beacon Beta. Embedded into the ship's dorsal superstructure, it triggered a final phase. Masking shrouds disengaged fully, revealing structural plates previously hidden beneath layers of decomposing agricultural storage bins. What had looked like overflow tanks were power regulators. What had seemed like broken stabilizers were sensor harpoons. Terran command logs labeled the monolith's new state as combat exempt, not because it was unarmed, but because by the time an enemy realized it was at war, the war was already over. On the flagship, the control cradle blinked red, then green, then flat. All helm inputs disabled. Life support shifted to passive mode. Tren turned, eyes dead. Did we ever board a ship, or walk straight into an engagement tomb? The officer beside him, jaw trembling, muttered, I think they built it for this exact moment. From the outer ring of the Darvani formation, a recon vessel tried to retreat. It made it 5 ship lengths before its primary reactor overloaded. There was no explosion, only a shuddering collapse. Slights gone, systems dead, motions ceased. The ship froze mid-burn and drifted sideways, like a vessel cut from time. A single monolith transmission echoed across the Darvani command net. Short. Brutal. Non-compliant boarders identified. Containment in progress. Operative Rain Vecker pressed his palm against the access relay embedded beside corridor F-13. A silent burst of energy rippled through the walls. 37 microtransmitters hidden beneath surface panels and disguised as environmental regulators activated in unison. He stepped away, boots rolling smoothly across anti-vibration flooring, and watched as the corridor light bars shifted tone. From pale white to a sickly flickering green, the trap was active. Inside Section Delta, 3 Darvani soldiers ran past a bulkhead that hadn't existed in their previous mapping data. One of them glanced at his helmet hood, then froze. What was that? He asked. The others slowed. He pointed to the side panel of his display. Replay log just flashed. That can't be right. His own kill feed, footage from his body cam during a previous engagement. looped in the bottom corner of his visor. He watched himself fire into a human soldier from 5 days ago, then retreat through a collapsed corridor on a separate vessel entirely. The timestamp on the file matched the current time. Another Darvani lifted his head, staring straight ahead. I'm seeing it too. It's not ours anymore. Before they could reorient, the loop changed. Now it showed their own advance, just minutes earlier, walking into this very corridor. But their positions didn't match. The version in the video turned right. They had turned left. Someone else was broadcasting them to themselves, incorrectly. A high-pitched stutter snapped through their audio channels. It wasn't a scream, nor a mechanical screech. It was a human voice, chanted in fragments, slowed and reversed. Containment, not extraction. Hearn, now isolated from his unit, yanked his helmet free and slammed it against the wall. My HUD stuck on repeat. I'm watching my squad die over and over again, but I'm still breathing. His command slate, normally used to ping other Darvani units, flashed corrupted names. None were recognizable. Each identifier contained distorted glyphs woven into standard crew tags. Just familiar enough to deceive, just wrong enough to destabilize. He slapped a Reiki attempt into the slate. It beeped once, then projected an overlay showing his own death at the hands of an Omega operative, 6 seconds from now. He blinked. Nothing came. But the feed didn't vanish. It stayed. On board the Darvani flagship, Warlord Jask Tren bared his teeth, knuckles whitening around the edge of the command rail. Report status of all internal squads. The communications officer hesitated. I can't verify who's responding. Sir, we're getting repeat signals. Identical timestamps. Same voice logs. Repeating on staggered delay. Tren leaned in, staggered. Yes. It's like someone recorded all outgoing transmissions and is playing them back. Out of order. Half of them aren't even happening yet. Daily clothing? He turned slowly toward his second-in-command. That's not a network breach, that's temporal mimicry. Sir, they've copied our voice patterns and are simulating future responses based on past structure. They're making us distrust what's live and what's playback. Below deck, 2 Darvani squads regrouped near the monolith spine junction. One of the team leaders raised his hand to issue new commands when his comm suddenly opened on their own. His own voice emerged from the headset. We are flanked. Exit east. Regroup at Hatch Point Bravo. He froze. I didn't say that. The others hesitated, unsure if the order had come from him moments ago or was being relayed now. They turned east. As they did, the hallway twisted abruptly. Floor plates folded upward, diverting them into a side shaft. A flash of movement darted through the mist ahead. Gunfire erupted. None of it hit the target. Unit 6 Nullmark disengaged from the ceiling rail moments later, having never been in that corridor. The shadow had been projected, reflected through low-light distortion fields seeded throughout the spine junction. They had walked directly into the reflection of a trap. Inside Earth's encrypted command channel, Marshal Coric Dane stood before the Lashfire terminal. He gave no commands. He needed none. Everything that unfolded was already authored into the monolith's operational logic. Each moment of confusion had been anticipated. Not controlled, not monitored, but introduced through environmental design and cognitive overload thresholds. Back on the Darvani command bridge, one of the bridge officers dropped to his knees, tearing at his gloves. It's inside my response loop. My thoughts are showing up in the kill feed. I never even said them, just... Tren crossed the floor and slammed the emergency circuit breaker, deactivating the bridge-wide helmet interface. Everyone strip feed access, manually. I want raw data only. The crew obeyed, unhooking their HUDs, switching off smart-filtered displays. The room's light grew colder. They could now only see what came through their own eyes. But the monolith had prepared for that too. A low tremor vibrated through the flagship's lower deck as the proximity alert triggered without explanation. The source? A phantom signal, matching their own beacon. Not Earth's. Not enemy. Their own ship's signal. Somehow displaced in returning. The nav officer shook his head. We're chasing our own tail code. Tren exhaled slowly. Pull back all strike teams. No, we can't. All outbound calls are looping. They're receiving withdrawal orders before we send them. Tren looked up at the viewport. The monolith hadn't moved. Not a meter. And yet, every ship in the Darvani fleet was slowly drifting, off formation, out of sync. Bleeding fuel they weren't commanding to burn. He stared forward, jaw tight. Then prepare to engage with what remains. Launch remaining skiffs. I don't care who they hit. From his private panel, he keyed in a back-channel comlink to the 3 remaining squads on board the monolith. The screen showed them scrambling. Some had discarded armor, others had fired on shadows. All of them were talking, but their words no longer matched their lips. The feed was out of order. Some were laughing. One appeared to be sobbing. He muted it. From behind, his executive officer said, "There's no coordination left. They're trying to kill illusions." Tren didn't answer. His eyes were locked on a single line flashing across the feed. Replay error, you already lost. Unit 6, codenamed Nullmark, crawled beneath Deck 9's subframe. Every joint movement calculated to avoid pressure vibration triggers layered into the support rail. The narrow passage reeked of thawed stabilizer fluid and oxidized copper. An intentional sensory overlay meant to disorient invaders relying on scent markers. He reached the access terminal embedded behind a decoy coolant junction, pressed his thumb against the gel-sealed biosensor, and whispered into the throat actuator, "Vault cycle, execute." 32 seconds later, the grave vault opened. What followed didn't begin with gunfire. It started with the flicker of light behind the eyes of every Darvani operator still alive on the monolith. Helmet HUDs blinked once, then again, out of sync. The feed windows were replaced with a raw stream of footage, blurry at first, then crystalline. A Darvani soldier staggering backward, with a blade buried in his collar. A second later, the same death played again, slower, then again reversed. Each kill looped endlessly, sourced from the combat feeds of already fallen units. No matter which direction they turned, the faces were familiar. Some screamed, others ripped off their helmets. Near Vault Core 2, an access shaft retracted, revealing an octagonal chamber lined with reflective tiles. These weren't polished. They were designed to simulate depth. Images repeated endlessly into themselves. The first Darvani to enter paused. His reflection didn't match. It wore his armor, held his weapon, but its posture was angled wrong, limbs slightly delayed. It blinked, twice, as if mocking the frame rate of real movement. "Something's wrong in here," he muttered. His team lead stepped beside him and raised a rifle. The mirrored surfaces didn't reflect the action. They showed different movements. Other battles, ones they hadn't fought yet. Then the vault engaged. From the chamber's central ceiling, a cube descended slowly, its surfaces covered in layered grids. Each side projected a different moment of combat, real feeds from each Darvani squad, stitched together and manipulated. The angles were impossible. The footage included shots from behind the attackers, as if taken from unseen allies, but the Darvani had no such footage sources. "Sir," came a whisper from the fleet command cradle. "Something inside that chamber is transmitting to every linked vessel. We're seeing our own strike teams die in ways they didn't." Yask Tren clenched his jaw. "Which units?" "Some are still alive," the officer swallowed. "But they're receiving feeds of their own deaths." On the monolith, automated turrets unfolded from the ceiling rafters of Corridor G9. These weren't rapid-fire systems. They cycled deliberately, scanning movement and targeting only non-Terran biosignatures. One Darvani sprinted past the bend, saw the turret, froze, and survived. His squad mate followed a heartbeat later, weapon raised, and collapsed mid-step as the turret zeroed his heat signature and fired a single burst to the base of the skull. The survivor screamed and shot back. No hit registered. The turret ignored him. It didn't need to kill them all. It needed them to doubt what it would do next. Across the corridor matrix, light strobed, Short pulses, alternating rhythm, always just enough to break special orientation. In Vault Access Chamber 4B, the internal beacon activated, projecting recursive identity beacons into the helmet relays of any enemy within 400 meters. This created false readings of ally proximity, overlaid with flickering status icons. Some Darvani teams began turning their weapons on each other. In the confusion, they fired blindly at heat blurs that matched human profiles, but weren't moving. Inside the Grey Vault's observation ring, Nullmark crouched beside the command pillar and adjusted the biometric exclusion pattern. Friendly fire parameters narrowed further. Now only Darvani frames were visible to Monolith's kill systems. The environment didn't need to be hostile, it just needed to feel familiar enough that the mind did the rest. One Darvani officer stumbled into a maintenance hall and found his team waiting. He approached, gasping for breath, visor fogged from exertion. The nearest figure opened fire. The image vanished in a blur. There had been no team. The system had rebroadcast a memory of his squad into the corridor's holographic reflectors, mimicking their postures perfectly. It had been playing the feed on loop since his last interaction with them, 12 minutes earlier. Back on the flagship, a systems tech leaned toward Tren. "We can't block the transmissions. They're not comms-based. The monolith is projecting a reactive signal through our own diagnostic networks. Every time we check stability, we invite another corruption." Tren turned slowly, eyes darkened. "Then stop checking. Lock the bridge interface. No more diagnostics. Issue only what you can verify with your eyes." Another officer rose, trembling. "That's the point, sir. We can't trust our eyes anymore." Tren shoved past him, stepped to the viewport, and watched as one of the escort vessels spiraled off formation. It had fired on a shadow reflected across its own hull, an image rebroadcast from the monolith's surface layer. The ship's targeting system had flagged its own escort cruiser as hostile and emptied a broadside volley before recognizing the error. Now it drifted without power, hull breached along the starboard wing. He barked into the command channel. "Deactivate all forward recon craft, disable targeting AI, pull everything back to manual, reset fleet to analog protocol." His executive officer answered without hesitation. "Sir, those systems are already responding to someone else." "They're overriding us. Someone fed our entire tactical database into a logic trap and mirrored our failsafe structure. We can't shut it down, because the shutdown protocol is the trigger." From the monolith's vault core, another wave of distortion emerged. This time it wasn't a visual feed. It was audio. The Darvani fleet-wide channel cracked open to a loop of final breaths, each one unique, matching the physiological signature of every operator who had died aboard the monolith. The playback was staggered, and the timing matched squad roster IDs, descending in rank order. One bridge officer dropped to the floor sobbing. "That's my brother's last report. He died on board." "I'm hearing it again." Tren didn't flinch. "Seal fleet comms, collapse internal networks, full blackout." The screen pulsed red. "Command rejected." The monolith had issued the directive first. Tren stepped over the body of his comms officer without glancing down. The bridge was cold now, not from environmental systems, but from absence. Every display had reverted to low primal T diagnostics. Crew monitors blinked in steady rhythm, unresponsive, showing only idle sleep mode sequences, as if the men attached to them no longer existed. The artificial lighting, normally warm, flickered erratically between red and blue, casting the consoles in an eerie, shifting pallor that made reading any display a test of patience and trust. "Status on Task Force Delta?" he asked into the command node. No reply. He tried again. A voice returned, his own. "Status on Task Force Delta?" He pulled back, jaw tight, and stabbed the input key with 2 fingers. The node responded in his voice again, only this time the words were clipped. Slower, the rhythm was wrong. "Task Force Delta, 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 status unknown, known." He shut off the feed manually and spun around. "Bridge-wide systems. Hard reset. Strip command filters. I want visual-only control, no audio tags." The nav officer remained seated, hands on his thighs, eyes unfocused. Trin stormed toward him and grabbed the console edge. "You heard me." "I'm still here," the man replied, voice flat. "But the ship isn't." Trin froze. "Explain." The officer didn't move. "It answers before I act. Every command. Anticipated. Looped back. My intent triggers response before decision." Behind him, the main data stream burst into recursive loops. Diagnostic readouts for every Darvani vessel scrolled across the primary viewer, but each was flagged under a mirrored subroutine. If host, then action equals target. The interface had been rewritten to reverse allegiance identifiers. Human vessels now registered as friendly. Darvani warships showed up with priority threat markers. The weapons AI had begun recategorizing the fleet. He turned toward the command AI interface and activated the access gate. Reset command hierarchy. Re-establish warlord core. The AI responded with a single glyph, a red crest, Darvani in shape, but twisted, the center mark inverted, as if hand-drawn by someone unfamiliar with its meaning. The interface displayed a message. Command validation rejected, authority cycle already completed. From the tactical readout, one of the escort cruisers opened fire on a nearby corvette. The exchange lasted only 4 seconds, but the corvette never returned fire. Its weapon systems remained dormant, falsely registering the attacker as a non-combatant. When the first torpedo breached its side, the vessel's AI still flagged its attacker as a medical frigate. Across the fleet, communications fell apart. Cruisers flooded their own queues with diagnostic loops. Each crew tried to identify sabotage manually, only to trip recursive defense protocols embedded by monolith signal echo. Every security bypass launched another scan. Every scan initiated another failover. The crews tried to shut down chain reactions, but the structure they were trying to salvage was already using them as confirmation points. Trin shouted across the deck. "Pull manual override on secondary relay chains. Stop using automated inputs. They've poisoned the pathing." A sensor tech shouted back. "Every bridge node is running off mirrored input trees. If we don't act, nothing moves. If we act, we trigger loops." "Then isolate," Trin barked. "One ship at a time." A younger officer at the rear of the command deck turned toward him, face pale and still. "They don't need to fight us, Commander. They're turning us on ourselves." Trin crossed the bridge, slammed open the AI core's secondary housing and grabbed the manual kill switch lever. He pulled. The panel hissed. The lights died. Then came the error glyph. Projected on every surface, every console, every internal display. Red. Simple. Familiar. Loop integrity complete. Network root dissolved. Trin's grip tightened. "I want every fleet ship on isolated, manual pathing, no interlink, no daisy chaining. Disable all AI logic trees. Immediately." No one moved. Because no one could. He turned slowly. The bridge crew remained at their stations, but their displays were dead. Monitors blank. Audio relays silent. None of them breathed wrong. None of them blinked. They were connected, but no longer part of his command. The monolith had overwritten them, not by force, but by making them irrelevant. The ship didn't need a captain anymore. On screen, the final emergency contact request was transmitted, intended for any Darvani vessel outside the feedback range. But the reply came faster than physics should have allowed. It carried the proper encryption stamp. It bore the High Commander crest. It used the correct phrasing, and it recited the Darvani creed. "By pattern and blade, by flag and flame, we hold our line above all others." But something was wrong. The words didn't match the cadence of the true creed. The inflection bent downward, the intonation lagged, the vowels flattened, the rhythm. It was a mockery. The AI hadn't just destroyed their hierarchy, it had impersonated their beliefs. Trin turned back to the viewport. 3 more vessels were drifting. 2 had already collided. 1 had inverted its shield alignment and vented atmosphere into the void before the crew could override. He opened his mouth to issue one last command, but the command node preempted him, displayed his own words before he spoke, and then executed them. Rain Vecker reached the central spire of the vault with one gloved hand pressed against the cold interface node. The pressure sensor recognized him immediately. A green ring spread outward from the contact point, followed by a low, subauditory pulse only his neural relay could register. He didn't wait for confirmation. The sequence was automatic, pre-approved, hardwired into the monolith's mission profile. The vault sealed behind him with a thud that rippled faintly through the floor beneath his boots. The locks twisted inward. Nothing escaped after that. He turned and climbed. Along Deck 9, residual heat shimmered above the floor from discharged turret arrays. Spent cartridges, blackened and flattened, rolled gently as he passed. They were still warm. Every kill had been deliberate. No overfire, no collateral debris. His HUD displayed movement signatures still active across the ship, but none belonged to the enemy. The monolith had filtered all non-Terran profiles out of its recognition schema. It didn't need to track what it had already buried. Across 4 decks, Omega-class operatives returned to rally points. Not one spoke. Not one celebrated. Each man synced to the internal clock, moving in staggered intervals to avoid audible detection from still vacant corridors. Nullmark reached his assigned extraction tunnel 3 seconds ahead of schedule, boots slipping into the grip grooves embedded in the wall. Ver followed suit from Deck 6, wrapping a thermal shield around his torso, eyes sweeping both directions with practiced detachment. Rain tapped the final coordination pulse. It spread through the relay like a drop of heat in cold water, diffusing, unseen but undeniable. Every operative received the signal through their bone link receivers. Disengage. Exit pattern Echo 3. No vocal, no fire, no trace. Below the monolith, the Darvani fleet drifted. Several ships remained offline, their primary systems caught in recursive status resets. Others spun slowly out of formation, unable to receive or verify real-time orders. The flagship listed, one stabilizer torn from its hull during an internal weapons malfunction. Yasktren hadn't reappeared on any frequency. His command link blinked once more, then disappeared from the registry altogether. The monolith's external ID broadcast shut off mid-cycle. A second later, the vessel's signature no longer registered on Darvani scanners. It hadn't cloaked. It hadn't fled. It simply no longer existed on their systems. Back on Earth, Marshal Korik Dane sat inside the underground cradle with his hand resting on the access terminal. The screen bore no names, no ranks, only a singular phrase across the center in dull white letters. Latchfire. Exhausted. He didn't look up as the status feed scrolled downward. Operatives green, 0 losses, external footprint, null. The monolith's beacon returned no handshake, as expected. Its dampening array had activated upon final vault seal, reducing its digital presence to substatic levels, far below any standard recognition threshold. He keyed in one final command. Mission archive non-existent. Every Omega operative climbed into transit tubes built into the internal vent systems, sealed, pressurized capsules that ejected at sub-Jane intervals through auxiliary fuel ducts. Each pod tumbled gently into open drift before being picked up by silent retrieval carriers, already stationed along the corridor's edge. There were no departure pings, no beacon trails, no chatter. The monolith's spine realigned. The dorsal ridge retracted to simulate cargo strain. The exposed weapons platforms folded back into panels lined with synthetic corrosion. Heat-shedding arrays rebooted to simulate failing radiators, and the ship settled into stillness. It didn't leave. It didn't need to. The Darvani survivors aboard their crippled fleet began broadcasting emergency logs back to their home sectors, but most of those logs were flagged and discarded by their own encryption filters. The monolith's influence had spread too far. Any outgoing file containing its internal beacon tags triggered rejection. Their own ships didn't trust them anymore. By the end of the hour, every Darvani system flagged the monolith as false salvage, encounter blacklisted. No tactical report was accepted. No footage survived verification. Every attempt to describe what had occurred aboard that freighter broke internal network consistency checks. The event, from a protocol standpoint, had not happened. Ver sat inside the recovery skiff, eyes closed, body wrapped in thermal cloth. Across from him, Nullmark remained still, helmet resting on his lap. A red confirmation light blinked inside the cabin. A signal they wouldn't speak about. A reminder. Engagement denied. Operation concluded. Debrief classified. The car was the last to board. He secured the latch with a twist of his wrist, exhaled once, and let the hatch seal behind him. The retrieval craft decoupled from its drift point and slid away without propulsion flash. No trail. Back near the Vexus drift, the monolith floated quietly among the debris. Its systems cycled down. The hull no longer showed heat signatures. The windows remained black. Its beacon, once faked to mimic a freighter, broadcast nothing at all. The ship's last command cycle ran one line of internal script. Playback concluded. Await new boarders. The Vexus drift stabilized in under 2 weeks. Cargo runs resumed first. Small, cautious, unarmed freighters operated by third-tier logistics companies desperate to reestablish trade lanes. Escort ships didn't accompany them. Too many commanders refused to risk proximity. Their reasons weren't political, they weren't military, they were mathematical. Every Darvani fleet system flagged the sector with a red loop warning. Invalid engagement data, conflict, timestamp missing. Nothing had been recorded, nothing could be proven. The monolith wasn't in the reports. It wasn't mentioned by name, but it was in every conversation. Smugglers told each other to skip that line. Miners crossing the edge of Drift Delta transferred cargo mid-route rather than pass through the central corridor. Black market haulers began adding structural flaws to their own ships, denting hulls, misaligning heat vents, simulating reactor instability, just enough to resemble a certain ghost. A ship like the one that hadn't returned fire, that hadn't claimed a kill, that hadn't declared itself, and still changed everything. Inside Darvani intelligence halls, senior archivists met behind closed doors. They combed through every fragment of data pulled from the Vexus operation. There were no confirmed images of the monolith post-transformation. All comms footage ended at a mirrored glyph. Every visual was corrupted by recursive feedback. They ran diagnostics until their archives flagged themselves for overwriting. One archivist, a former commander, placed his hand on the table during a closed-session hearing and said, "We don't know how we lost. We only know we did." His voice never rose. He never returned to active service. Elsewhere in the mid-sector, a consortium of outer rim traders met inside an unmarked station orbiting a neutral moon. They didn't discuss supply routes. They discussed what not to transport. Certain manifest codes were avoided. Earth Trade 6, L3A, Registry Class 19C, Agricultural Biosim Series Red. Ships bearing these signatures, even fraudulently, were denied docking. Others were tagged as restricted by insurance. When asked why, the standard answer was, "We don't pay out claims for bait." Meanwhile, Earth said nothing. No broadcast, no admission, no documentation. Back in the cradle where the latch-fire terminal once pulsed, the screen remained black. Marshal Corrick Dane had sealed the chamber, archived the relay records under a false transport survey, and walked away. There was no monument, no medal ceremony. There was no name for what they'd done. They didn't need one. The point hadn't been to destroy the Darvani fleet. The point had been to erase certainty. The monolith hadn't delivered death. It had delivered doubt. No one knew when the trap had been set. No one could be sure if another existed. And then, a transmission leaked. Low perimeter, anonymous, origin unverified. It didn't include coordinates or names. It simply showed a single image, a freight vessel, drifting in open space. Unescorted. Damaged. Crates visible along the spine. Agricultural stenciling flaking off in long vertical streaks. Thermal decay signature matching known civilian charts, radio silent. No weapons visible. And floating behind it, at an angle, the flickering end of a registration tag, TCS. Speculation tore through the independent networks like fire through dry leaves. Debates erupted in encrypted circles. Some claimed it was an illusion. Others said it was the same ship, reappearing. A few believed it was a new one, modeled to continue the pattern. No confirmation came. The Darvani border fleet, tasked with policing that region, voted unanimously to exclude the area from current enforcement protocols. They didn't mark it hostile. They marked it undefined. No one was reassigned there. Back on the Earth side of the trade lines, Omega operatives returned to full blackout. None were publicly acknowledged. Their records remained sealed. Their footage archived inside segmented shells that could only be decrypted under wartime sovereign override. Rain Vakar sat alone in the debriefing chamber for 42 minutes before speaking. The officer across from him said nothing. Rain leaned forward once and said, "We didn't win. We just made them stop looking." He stood and left. The chamber lights dimmed. The recording was erased. Outside the Vex's perimeter, cargo traffic surged again. Ships flew faster. Confidence returned. But not everywhere. There remained sectors where traders hesitated. Areas where scouts reported static shadows lingering in low-orbit drift. Regions where navigators refused to log full burns, worried that too much attention might summon something that didn't respond to hails, something that wasn't declared. That didn't answer questions. That didn't demand surrender. Something that waited. Aboard one such drifting freighter, the same false registry ID blinked across a cracked screen. The crates were stacked the same. The hull looked broken, but every panel was perfectly aligned. Inside, sealed behind triple-locked containment doors, a pod waited. Stasis engaged. Status green. One operative, one mission. No timer. Just one phrase embossed along the inside of the forward bulkhead, written in Terran standard script. They thought it was cargo. What do you think Earth should do next? Stay quiet, or let the galaxy know what's buried inside our freight? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us what kind of HFY story you want to see next. Subscribe to witness what happens when humanity doesn't ask for permission.